Okay. So today I want to finish up at least this part of our study of spiral dynamics. And we're going to do that by talking about what it takes to move into the second tier of the spiral. And if you remember, taking a look at our little model of the spiral here, the first six stages from the bottom up, that's from beige up to green, those are the first tier. And then the second tier, which is not complete right now, begins with yellow, and right now we have yellow and turquoise. So the real key difference when you say, okay, well, what's the difference between the first tier and the second tier? The real big difference is in the first tier, each one of those memes, or V memes, value memes, is pretty sure that it's got it right and the rest of them don't get it, which is is an environment that I think we all understand all too well. Um, but when we get into that second tier, not only have we transcended what came before, but we included, we find those pieces that worked for us. And that we bring along with us. And I talked a little bit about that last week, and I used Laura as an example. That red is like the joy of competitive sports, and she's she's a runner, and there's no doubt about that. But like a couple days before, we'd been celebrating Abby graduating from high school, and those sorts of traditions and recognitions and family events are part of purple, and so there's a lot of different things that we can carry along with us. And this is really not as unfamiliar as it may sound when we say the words transcend and include. And it's something that we've all done throughout our lives. Every time we've graduated to the next level of school, which I misspelled, when when we left home or got married, or wow, Lord knows when we became parents, that was like graduating to a whole new level of stuff. But we had to, we I think we tried to include the best things from when we were kids, and leave out some of the bad parts. Some of us have done better at that than others, and I will admit I wasn't real great at it when I first got started. And for some of us, when you come out as whatever you are, when I got sober, there a lot of these transitions, you know, they vault us into a new way of being, but it doesn't mean that we completely replace what we were before. There's still a lot of value in the things that we bring with us. And, one of those things is in the ability it gives us to understand things that other people are going through. And, I know that we can all look back over our lives and think, wow, if only I knew then what I know now. And unfortunately, those of us who are parents know that we can't just tell our kids the things that we know now that we didn't know then, because they're going to ignore us. They're going to have to go out and learn those lessons on their own. And, maybe at some point, sometime around when they're 30, they're going to come back and say, hey, you know what, Dad, you were right about that. Or maybe they'll just post about it on Facebook. Yeah, if we have Facebook when your kids are 30. It's hard to say. But what it lets us do is it lets us remember what it felt like when we were confronted with those particular challenges, and be open to helping others. I tell you, one of the things that I've been gifted with in this in this line is the 12-step program. Even at 17 plus years of sobriety, I still get to interact with people who who are still struggling. Some people who just came into the program, some people that show up drunk. And I know what that's like in a way that, you know, quote unquote, normal people don't, because I've been through it. So it really, there is value in having made this evolution. Sometimes we wonder, it's like, man, why do I have to go through all this stuff? I remember some of you may have heard me tell this story before, but this is back when I was at my old home group back in Florida many years ago. And it was really strange. In this one night, it was a discussion group. And in this one, little discussion with maybe a dozen people around the table, 3 different people there all shared that they had recently been diagnosed with hepatitis C and that they were scared. I mean, like scared for their lives. Well, my sponsor had been living with hepatitis C and had actually done, I think it was interferon was the drug that they'd put him on, and he no longer even had any detectable levels of it in his body, even though it's not supposed to be curable. So he shared about that. Well, later on, I'm one of the world's worst sponsees. I never call my sponsor, but what he and I used to do was after the meetings, we'd go out to the porch and he would smoke cigarettes and we would talk. And so it was our usual after the meeting, and we were outside and he was smoking. And he said, well, Charles, now I know why I have hepatitis. And I said, why? And he said, it was so I could help those people tonight. I know that, we might be tempted to be mad at God and say, well, why did you have to throw hepatitis into the world anyway? Why does anybody have to have it? Those are big questions, and I don't know. I can't answer that. But what I can say is that we can use the things that we've been through to help other people, and instead of just looking down on those experiences as we have transcended them, we can, include them in our heart and allow ourselves to be open to those people doing the same things or going through similar experiences. And, being aware that we've not only had those experiences, but being aware of our feelings helps us to be less judgy about the whole thing. Rather than calling ourselves stupid and calling our kids stupid about doing a particular thing that we probably shouldn't have done and they shouldn't either, we can be a little more understanding, and that self-awareness is good in a lot of different ways. As it says on the slide, recalling our own experiences. What were we thinking about? How did it feel? What did we do? And then we have to ask ourselves, well, yeah, maybe I was wrong, but what was it I wanted to have happen? What was my heart hoping for? What was I afraid of? And boy, is that ever the key to a lot of stuff. When we're trying to unwrap what is my issue? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I not being successful in the things that are meaningful to me? What did I fear? May be one of the best questions we can ask ourselves. And ultimately, what did I believe in? What is the container of my values? What are the beliefs that occupy it that are then giving birth to my thoughts, which then give birth to my actions, right? And as Ms. Wilkie said, even if I'm in dispute with others, I can, as long as I'm self-aware and I'm really kind of taking my own internal temperature as I go, I can relate to people in a non-threatening, helpful, and understanding way, even if I'm in dispute with them. And I included this particular picture. Some of you may have either seen or read about the recent run-in these 2 guys had. One of them is Rand Paul, who is a senator, and the other one is Dr. Fauci, who has been a lead epidemiologist for a long, long time. And at one point in the testimony that Fauci was giving before this particular Senate committee, um, Senator Paul goes into this long thing about where he's questioning the validity of some of the scientific measures and recommendations that Fauci had been giving, and he ended up telling Fauci that he wasn't all that. And what Fauci did was he just took a breath and said, "Hey, I realize the science isn't perfect, but I am a scientist. I'm not doing this for any political reason. I'm just, doing what I do. I've been doing this for 40 years." He's like, "I realize I'm not all that. I'm not the answer. Nobody's the answer. We got to live in the question, and we just, all we can do is do our best." And it was very disarming to see him not take it personally. And that, that's one of the 4 agreements, right? Never take anything personally. It's so powerful when people can do that. When you can take what, you could take as an insult or an attack and just shrug it off, right? And just say, "Hey, yeah, I'm not perfect, but you know what? We're all a work in progress, and that's okay." So one of the big things that we learn as we move into the second tier, when we were moving from tier to tier, it was really easy to look down on, maybe not ourselves as we moved along, although in some cases we do, but especially looking on either, other groups, societies, cultures, or individuals who are part of a tier that's a little further down the scale. Certainly those cultures that we see in the past. It's like, we look back at well, we like to look back at the way, say, America was when slavery was legalized, but we still have a lot of work to do in that regard. But the thing is you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. There are valid values that are part of those other value memes that they continue to be valid no matter how far up the scale we get. The need to satisfy our basic physiological needs, that's beige. That's the lowest thing on the scale. But there's a reason that it's the base layer of Maslow's hierarchy, right? You got to have that base, if you can't eat, drink, water, and sleep, you're not going to get anywhere. And we need some healthy purple for bonding, especially with family and friends. But it also simply teaches us that we're social animals, and we need that. Healthy red needs to have fun and be creative and free to explore and enjoy life. You want to see my healthy red come out, ask me to help you optimize a Dungeons and Dragons character, right? Blue is all about safety and peace of mind and stability, and there are a lot of ways that we like to make sure things are going to be okay. I'm laughing at myself because I had a saying that I used to say back when I was in the military: "A clean track is a happy track." And I still say it today when I'm cleaning the kitchen. Laura will tell you. It's just, there are some things that we bring along with us as we go. But no matter how far up the scale we go, we still will sense a need to move on, right? So we get to blue, and then at a certain point, it starts to feel kind of authoritarian, very, "You're not the boss of me," which, a lot of people are having problems with today. So they want to move into orange and be the ruler of their own kingdom and be able to go out there and make lots of money for themselves and take good care of themselves and whatnot. But then after you live in that particular meme for a while, which is actually the dominant meme in America today, we start to dislike the competitiveness and the failure to care for each other. At least some of us do, right? So then that throws us into green. Well, after you spend some time in green, you may say, "You know what? we're all, you know, we're all chanting and we're all talking about collectivism and we're all trying to make decisions by consensus and we're not getting anywhere, right? So you get prepared to move on. You get the idea that, okay, this is not enough. What comes next? So what's the first thing that happens when you need to change? We resist it, right? We resist change. There's a cartoon that ministers like to share. And the first slide shows the minister in front of the congregation, and he says, you know, who wants to see change? And everybody in the congregation raises their hand. They're like, yay. And then in the next slide, he says, and who wants to change? And nobody raises their hand. But what happens when we start resisting change is things start to unravel, right? And, you know, these are just some, you know, accidents, quote unquote. We get ill. We have things that feel like personal disasters. And I can tell you, as someone who has been in addiction, you know, and gotten to the place where change became necessary, it took a personal disaster. It took the end of my second marriage, you know, for me to wake up and decide, okay, it's time to change. Now, one of the things that we can count on is that there's going to be somebody helping us find the way, you know, and history shows us that great teachers emerge in times of change, you know, and so then some of us may be saying, oh, well, you know, I mean, right now it's pretty rough, you know, like maybe Jesus is going to come back. And there are actually some people that think that that's imminent, as they have thought for the past 2,000 years. But here's the thing, you know, we can't accept Jesus to show up and put us to bed and tell us a story and fix everything. To be honest with you, that was part of the problem that he had 2,000 years ago. His fellow Jews were expecting the Messiah that, you know, they'd been foretelling for some time. And that's what they wanted him to be. But he was saying, no, that's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to save you. I'm here to show you that you save yourself, right? I'm here to help you find the Christ in you, to be that divine child of our Father. And there's a reason he used the words our Father, right? In fact, there's some scholars that think that you know, what we today call the Lord's Prayer, the only two words that Yeshua of Nazareth actually used to answer the question, how should we pray, is those two words, our Father. So if we know we can find guidance, but the bottom line is it has to become an inside job. We have to put on our own divinity. My personal website's called recoveringdivinity.com, and that really speaks to, you know, kind of my personal mission. I want to help people recover their indwelling divinity, because I think that's what Jesus was trying to teach us. I mean, I think that's why he showed up, was so we would get it. And the whole thing is when we get it, that moves us into the second tier. That moves us into yellow. So as Miss Wilkie, when she describes what it takes for us to enter yellow, I really, when I read this, I was like, well, you know, that's what we've been talking about in Unity for a long time. We become conscious that we are conscious, right? You ever notice when you're meditating and it's like you actually could sort of see your thoughts? It's like, oh, wow, that was a thought I was just thinking. And you can tell the difference between those moments when your thought screen is empty and the voices fall silent, and when you're having a thought. And it's like, oh, do I want to dive down into that thought and then, you know, kind of get back on the hamster wheel? No. Okay, I'll let that thought go. That consciousness, and being conscious that we are conscious, is a huge leap up. and we become responsible for ourselves and for our own spiritual evolution. When we realize I am a soul in evolution and it's up to me to take the next step, then we are, as she says, actively cooperating with the great creative principle that gave birth to us and the entire manifest world. And you know what this reminded me of was the 5 basic principles of unity. Now, I don't preach a lot of straight up unity here at MCSC, um, although I'm still a unity minister, right? But when I read what she wrote about entering yellow, it's so parallel to the 5 basic principles that we teach. Now we can, we've chewed on the bone of, panentheism, pantheism, theism, monotheism, which is basically, principle number 1, and we'll save that for a different day. But the idea that we are endowed with the qualities and attributes of spirit is where, when we become conscious that we're conscious, right? We are endowed with the qualities of spirit. And when we say in the 3rd principle that we create our life experiences by what we choose to think, feel, and believe, and our consciousness is cause, that's what she's saying here in the yellow part of the spiral, that we become responsible for ourselves and our evolution. And then the 4th and 5th principles about using the power of affirmative prayer to connect with spirit and co-create the good in life, and then actually get out there with the 5th principle and, having our rubber meet the road and actually acting on the principles that we hold. We actively cooperate with the great creative principle that gave birth to us in the entire manifest world. So one of the things she says that, one of the big things that we have to do now is because we're conscious, right? We need to make a conscious choice to follow some kind of psychological or spiritual discipline that will allow us to achieve personal mastery and develop the qualities of love, compassion, goodwill, and empathy. I love that. And what it reminded me of is the 2nd step of the 12 steps, right? So the 1st step is admitting we got a problem here, right? And the 2nd one is coming to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Then that's the bridge to the 3rd step, where we turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand it, right? But it's making a conscious choice to say, you know what, I'm going to go and do this thing. And, obviously, we have chosen to take at least this part of our spiritual journey together. I know Laura is basically more Buddhist than anything. Some of us, although, maybe a little bit of, Freya pagan kind of stuff going on there. I'm not 100% a unity person. I'm also a 12-step person. And I've got a couple of other things rattling around in there that really work for me. But it's when we say, yes, I'm going to not just brush aside the spiritual side of life, and I'm not just going to confine it to 1 hour a week. I'm not just going to go to church and say, hey, you know what, I'm good. I'm going to make spiritual practice, a spiritual discipline, a part of my evolution. That's when things really start to speed up for us. Now, the problem is we get discouraged. And, that's certainly understandable, right? When we look at all the crazy stuff that's going on out there right now, it is really easy to just say, I'm going to move out to the middle of nowhere and, build myself a little cabin and have a garden, and you guys all wear yourselves out because I'm all done with this.
So I'm not the only one?
You're not the only one. Absolutely not. But Don Beck, who was one of the other great, he took Claire Graves' original work on spiral dynamics, and then he kind of upped it a notch. What he said was that we should not be discouraged by economic and political collapse, because Before a major change, society regresses to old methods and values. What does that remind you of from right now? Make America great again. Sound familiar? Right? People are trying to, they sense change coming. They feel change coming. They're resisting it. They're trying to regress to the, quote, good old days, unquote. And quite frankly, we're, this may be the economic and political collapse that will send us into what comes next for this country. And boy, if we could get the bulk of the people in this country from orange to green, I would be thrilled, right? But as Edmund Burke said, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Even though we get discouraged with the step backward, we got to be willing to stay in the game, because at some point, if we do, we're going to get that 2 steps forward, whether we live to see it or not. So, as Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them, right? When we are locked into first tier consciousness, we can't see the whole picture, even though we think that we're seeing it from our foxhole. We think, hey, I've got this whole thing figured out. But what we really have figured out is the way it works for us within the boundaries of that particular value meme. So what we are called to do is transcend the individualized sets of values, but manage to include the best of all of them and really become compassionate in looking at ourselves and at each other. So we ask ourselves, what has to happen for us to change? What do we have to do in order for us to all be able to change? So they identify 6 conditions that are necessary for change. And the first one is simply to have the potential, right? And it's funny, there are some of these really track pretty well with the 12 steps, and in, having the potential for change, right? In the first step, we admitted we were powerless over, alcohol, drugs, shopping, whatever the issue of our 12th step is, right? We admitted we had a problem and the things had become unmanageable the way that they were, right? That gives us potential. Until I've admitted that, I don't have any potential, right? So then the second thing is to solve the problems that can be solved at the present level. And it's like, well, in that slide you just had there, Charles, Albert Einstein said you can't solve a problem with the level of thinking that you use to create it. Well, here's the deal. There are certain things that you can do at whatever, level that you're at that will fix certain pieces of it, or that will fix a little something that's going on. And the best analogy I came up with was, you're not going to dig a new well as long as you're getting water out of the old one, right? But when it dries up, right, when that problem is completely unsolvable now, you're not solving a little bit of it, it's completely unsolvable. That's when you're like, okay, I'm going to grab a shovel, right? That's when we get out there. We realize that more of the same no longer works. I can't keep going back to this well expecting water. I've got to do something different. So we identify and we deal with whatever it is that's holding us back, right? It's like, I have these particular issues in my life, and that really, identifying and dealing with the barriers, to me, that was like the 4th and the 5th step, right? Where I do my personal inventory, and then I see, what's my deal on the inside? What are the things that I'm afraid of? What are my resentments? What's the poison that I'm drinking every day that is keeping me drinking poison literally every day, right? What is that? I have to know what that is. It's like Yoda said, named must named must your fear be before vanquish it you can. You got to know what you're dealing with. So you gain some insight into what is causing your problems. Not just what the problems are, but what the cause is. Because a lot of times we keep dealing with symptoms. We keep, medicating our symptoms, and we don't get down to what is causing the problem. And then we go and we get some support, we get some help. We go outside of us and of our problem field that we've created, and we say, okay, I need some help. And we can do this together. All right. Now, to actually change, right? Two big things. Pretty simple. To move forward together into a higher level of existence for everyone here on earth, we just have to change these two ingrained habits. And boy, are these ever staring us smack in the face right now. Number one is our piecemeal, ad hoc, fragmented, competitive approach to problem resolution. Boy, howdy. I mean, when we look at what's going on right now with this pandemic, and you want to talk about a piecemeal, ad hoc, fragmented, competitive approach to problem resolution, how about having all the different states and the federal government compete for N95 mask contracts? It's such a perfect example, and it's so stupid, right? And then number two, and boy, if this hasn't been with us always, the way that these complex problems are overlaid with racial and ethnic poison, compromising every initiative and polarizing the elements which should be working in concert with each other. So, okay, I'm not the biggest George W. Bush fan on earth, okay? He has a lot of faults, and he did a lot of things wrong when he was the president of the United States. But recently, he pushed out a little video, a little opinion piece on what's going on with the pandemic. And he said something that so profoundly matches what they're talking about in this leap that we need to make in order to change that I wanted to share it. He said, let us remember how small our differences are in the face of this shared threat. In the final analysis, we are not partisan combatants. We are human beings, equally vulnerable and equally wonderful in the sight of God. We rise or fall together. And believe it or not, that's some pretty high consciousness stuff from George W. Bush. So ultimately, we end up transcending into oneness. And at the end of the book Emergence, which I've been using primarily as a source for the past 3 weeks, Rosemary Wilkie shares this little quote or poem from Michael Eastcott. The fragmentary consciousness of the human frame is seeing its way towards the soul, the self, the whole from which it came, and is set like an aircraft turning onto the takeoff runway to begin the flight which will lift it into the sun. We are spiraling upwards in consciousness towards oneness. And we just have to remember to keep at it, and we're going to get there. So again, just a reminder, because it's I think it would be disingenuous for me to to quote an author as much as I've quoted Rosemary Wilkie the past few weeks, and not try to at least promote her book, right? There are a lot of different materials out there on spiral dynamics, and some of them you can get free. Some you'll find, like in on Amazon. This particular book, volume